Hello, and welcome to another edition of Recycle. Don't be a waster, your favourite podcast on all things recycling. In today's episode, we're going to do hopefully a short one on a news story that was in most of the Australian national press this morning, that a council in Perth in Western Australia, let me check, it's called Victoria Park, is proposing to fine people $5,000 for having bad smelling green bins. So these green bins are for the organic waste, basically grass, that sort of stuff, garden clippings. You're going to be fined $5,000 for having, if the bin smells, apparently. So I suppose in the last podcast, the reason this was interesting to me, in our last podcast, we talked about whether fining people is what we want to do to reach our recycling objectives. And I suppose my view was we'd really try not to. Like, I think fining people is... I think we've all had enough of that in the last couple of years. At least I have. We've all had enough of government overreach into our lives and, dictating to us and putting huge fines on us for doing things. I just think it's the wrong approach. But particularly this incident, which we'll dig into a bit, is really taking things to comic book levels. It's a bit like, I think you should be more awarded money if your bin doesn't smell. If it's green waste, I think the idea that your bin wouldn't smell is almost the more fanciful event. Green waste smells. This stuff it fundamentally rots, breaks down and rots, and depending on how often you're picking these bins up, which I assume is not going to be, probably not every week, maybe every fortnight. Bearing in mind this is Australia and it gets very hot for large amounts of the year. This stuff, in theory, will be sitting in a plastic box, sweating and breaking down and releasing methane and carbon dioxide and different gases, and fundamentally they will smell. It reminds me of I previously worked in a major waste corporation that had some French executives. It was a French headquarter business, and at one point they operated what was called an advanced recycling facility, which was basically a huge indoor plant where green waste and I think some food waste was let to break down organically and form a compost. It was enclosed because the stench was so strong, but somebody made the mistake of the French executives, who were, some of them weren't the most down-to-earth people, were jetting in, and they had a flight booked back to Paris from Sydney that evening, and someone had the bright idea of putting them on this, bring them to visit this facility on the morning before they flew. And the problem with this was that these facilities smell incredibly bad, and the material, as it breaks down, it gets into your skin and into your clothes. And realistically, if you go into that facility, you will smell so bad for the next couple of days if you don't severely wash and launder your clothing. So these French executives went into the facility without being told about this, and smelled so bad on their flight back to Paris that I believe people eventually faced some disciplinary action. So that's just an aside. But, I think the idea that you'd fine $5,000 is just preposterous. How would you police this? What is the definition of smelling bad? That you can't smell is something that cannot be really categorized. The idea that anybody will be fined and that anybody would actually pay $5,000 is just fanciful again. So I think this is just... some bureaucrat or some council worker pushing their flexing their muscles a little bit and trying to prove how tough they are. I don't think it's going to achieve much. It's not going to, boost recycling rates with that sort of fear factor. And I think it's probably self-defeating. I think to boost recycling, to help the environment, we need to sell the positives. I would argue there's two ways. And we covered this a little bit on our last podcast about, capturing the economic value of recycling and helping the environment. Sometimes we always present it in the wrong way. It's almost like fining people. It's negatives. There's got to be positives as well. Are there positive payments or something for, doing the right thing? Could it even be that a national fund will pay corporations money if they recycle more? Those sort of ideas probably need to be explored more, because at the moment it's all the inverse. Could people get paid more could people pay less in their municipal bills if they recycle more? If their general waste bins are lighter, could they pay less? If you start bringing in sort of those incentives that are real incentives that actually reflect the reality of where the waste goes and who's to pay for it, that might be more beneficial. Obviously, at the minute in Australia we pay water bills. I know in other countries paying for water has been incredibly controversial, and people don't like paying more or less than their neighbours. So obviously those ideas, you'd really need to look at them in more detail. I think when you bring in the world of fining, clearly illegal dumping when it gets into criminal activity, there were cases recently where people were fly tipping at illegal dumps. Clearly that sort of stuff is environmental pollution. It's dangerous. It damages the environment. And clearly that's police action. And once the police gets involved, clearly you're looking at fines, you're looking at whatever criminal prosecutions. That's perfectly, no one's arguing against that. That's the realm of police and justice. But I think, when we're getting into fining people for just, for the natural breakdown of their own, if you have a large lawn, say for example, you have a lot of green clippings, does that make you more likely to be fined than others? When in reality, you're actually doing the right thing. You're disposing of this waste the way the council wants you to. So I think, sometimes people, and I think in Australia in particular, we've gone very much down the road of fining, of heavy arm tactics, of not, maybe not letting the market do what the market should do, and that's to drive people with natural incentives to do what they should do. And also bear in mind, the vast majority of people want to do the right thing if they can, if they're educated about it, and if it makes sense to them. So I think that would be my approach, and I think that's the way recycling and the environmental approach should go. I also, I don't know what listeners feel about this, but I also just feel there's a growing pushback from people. They literally feel that the green element, the recycling, the environment, is being pushed down their throat, whether they want it or not. They often believe that any alternative views have been forced out of the public space. That, I don't think, would you be allowed to appear on ABC television, for example, or radio, if you argued against, the global warming consensus, or if you argued against even recycling. I don't know, would you be allowed to appear on television and argue that everything should be dumped at landfill, and we should continue using plastics? I don't know if you would anymore, and I think people are resentful of that. And the more you enforce and you fine and you push things, and you don't allow debate and a discussion, because realistically improvements only happen when people discuss things, the more that we block that opportunity, people are pushing back, and I think that you are going to see more of this. There's going to be a certain percentage of the population who just will just bristle at what they feel they're being forced to do. I may be wrong on that, but yeah, I'd be interested to hear listeners' viewpoint. So we'll leave it there today. I hope no one gets fined $5,000 next week for their bin smelling. Fingers crossed. Okay, have a great weekend.